Sorry, this table's for family only, my brother smirked, pointing toward a fold-out chair by the trash can. Everyone laughed as I sat alone. Then the bill arrived, $3,200. The waiter looked at me. I just smiled and said, "Not my table." The air in the Gilded Spoon was thick with the clinking of expensive silverware and the low hum of self-important chatter, a symphony of success that always seemed to play just out of my reach, or so my family believed. And as I walked in, trying to blend into the opulent decor, my brother, Mark, spotted me from the grand main table, his usual smirk already in place, a well-practiced expression of superiority that had been honed over years of family gatherings where my life choices were always the main course of their ridicule. He waved me over with a flourish, not of welcome, but of a ringmaster inviting a clown into the arena, and as I approached, a nervous flutter in my stomach, I noticed the table was already packed, overflowing with cousins, aunts, uncles, and grandparents, all dressed in their finest, their faces gleaming with an almost artificial glow under the restaurant's soft, amber lights, a stark contrast to my simple, comfortable attire, which I'd chosen for a quiet evening, not a family inquisition. My heart sank a little when I saw there wasn't an empty seat, not even a sliver of space at the lavishly set table laden with crystal glasses and gleaming cutlery, a clear sign that my presence, as usual, was an afterthought, an obligation rather than a desire. And then Mark, with a theatrical sweep of his hand, pointed not to an extra chair, but to a flimsy, fold-out chair tucked awkwardly beside a potted palm, perilously close to the service entrance, and, to my utter dismay, right next to the discreetly placed, but unmistakably present, trash can, a silent, yet screaming, symbol of where I stood in their eyes. "Sorry, this table's for family only," he drawled, his voice carrying just enough for everyone at the main table to hear, his eyes twinkling with malicious glee, and then, as if on cue, a ripple of laughter spread through the family, a chorus of snickers and chuckles that felt like daggers piercing my already bruised ego, each laugh a confirmation of my outsider status, a reminder of every time I'd been made to feel small, insignificant, and utterly alone, a feeling I had grown accustomed to, but never truly accepted. My cheeks burned with a mix of shame and indignation, but I forced a tight smile, a mask I had perfected over the years to hide the sting, and walked over to the lonely chair, pulling it out with a quiet scrape that seemed to echo in the vast room, the sound a stark contrast to the boisterous merriment at the main table. As I sat down, the cheap metal digging into my thighs, the faint smell of discarded food wafting from the nearby bin, I felt a familiar wave of despair wash over me, a sense of being utterly disconnected from the people who were supposed to be my kin, a feeling that had only intensified since I had chosen a path less traveled, a path of spiritual exploration and inner growth, a journey they dismissed as hippie nonsense and a waste of potential. They were all about tangible success, the kind you could see and touch and brag about, big houses, fancy cars, prestigious careers, and my work, my passion for sharing spiritual wisdom, for helping others find their inner peace, for exploring the universe within, was simply invisible to them, or worse, a sign of my failure to conform to their rigid definition of what a successful life looked like. For years, I had tried to bridge the gap, to explain my passion, to share the profound shifts I was experiencing, but their eyes would glaze over, their smiles would tighten, and the conversation would inevitably shift back to Mark's latest promotion or Aunt Carol's new luxury car, leaving me feeling like an alien in my own family, speaking a language no one understood. Tonight, however, felt different. It felt like a deliberate act of public humiliation, a final, definitive statement of my unworthiness, and I wondered, for a fleeting moment, why I even bothered to show up to these gatherings, why I kept hoping for a flicker of understanding, a moment of acceptance. I tried to busy myself, pretending to be engrossed in the restaurant's elaborate menu, though my eyes blurred with unshed tears, the words on the page dancing mockingly before me, each dish a symbol of the feast I was excluded from, the celebration I was merely observing from the sidelines. I could hear snippets of their conversation, loud and boisterous, filled with anecdotes about their latest vacations and stock market gains, each word a subtle jab, a reminder of the life they lived and the life they assumed I didn't, couldn't, or wouldn't. My mother, usually the mediator, was unusually quiet tonight, her gaze occasionally darting towards me, a flicker of something that might have been pity or perhaps embarrassment in her eyes, but she said nothing, her silence a louder condemnation than any of Mark's taunts. I picked at a bread roll, the crust dry and tasteless in my mouth, and tried to focus on my breath, on the spiritual practices that had become my anchor in a world that often felt chaotic and unkind, reminding myself that my worth was not defined by their approval, that my peace came from within, not from their acceptance. Just as I was about to give up on the charade of enjoying myself and perhaps slip away unnoticed, a figure appeared by my table, a tall, impeccably dressed man with kind, intelligent eyes and a gentle smile, a man I immediately recognized as Mr. Eris Thorne, a renowned philanthropist and venture capitalist, a name that often appeared in the business section of newspapers, a name that commanded respect and awe in the circles my family so desperately aspired to be a part of. My heart skipped a beat. I had met Mr. Thorne a few months ago at a small, unassuming spiritual retreat, a place far removed from the glitz and glamour of the Gilded Spoon, where we had connected over shared philosophies about consciousness, energy, and the power of intention, and he had been surprisingly interested in my YouTube channel, Heart of the Universe, seeing its potential to reach and uplift many souls, something my family had scoffed at as a pipe dream. He had even offered some invaluable advice, and we had exchanged contact information. But I never expected to see him here, in this very moment, standing beside my trash can table. My family, oblivious to his presence, continued their lively conversation, their backs mostly turned to me, their focus entirely on their own world of perceived importance, and a mischievous thought, a tiny spark of rebellion, ignited within me. Mr. Thorne, with a polite nod, simply said, "Stephanie, I trust you found a comfortable spot?" I apologize for the slight delay, the traffic was rather unexpected. His voice was calm, resonant, and though he spoke softly, it was enough to cut through the din of my family's laughter, causing a few heads to turn, their expressions shifting from amusement to confusion. My brother Mark, mid-sentence about his latest stock market triumph, paused, his eyes narrowing as he tried to place the distinguished stranger. I smiled, a genuine smile this time, a sense of quiet power blooming in my chest. "Mr. Thorne, it's a pleasure to see you. Yes, this spot is unique. Thank you for making it." I emphasized the word making, a subtle nod to our previous conversation where he had expressed interest in supporting my work, a conversation I had kept entirely private from my family, knowing they would dismiss it as fantasy. Mr. Thorne chuckled softly, a warm, genuine sound that seemed to fill the awkward silence that had fallen over the main table as my family finally registered his presence, their eyes widening in recognition, their faces paling slightly as they realized who was standing by my table, the table by the trash can. Mark's jaw dropped, his smirk replaced by an expression of utter disbelief, while my mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My father, usually composed, looked like he'd seen a ghost. The air crackled with their unspoken questions, their sudden, dawning realization that perhaps, just perhaps, they had misjudged me, or at least, my connections. Mr. Thorne then turned to them, his smile polite but firm. "Good evening, everyone. I see you're all enjoying yourselves. Stephanie and I have a rather important discussion to continue, if you don't mind." He then pulled out a chair from a nearby, empty table, a proper, elegant chair, not a fold-out one, and placed it beside mine, a silent gesture of solidarity that spoke volumes. My family, stunned into silence, could only nod mutely, their eyes darting between Mr. Thorne and me, their carefully constructed world of superiority crumbling around them. As Mr. Thorne settled in, he leaned slightly towards me, his voice low and confidential. "I've reviewed your proposal, Stephanie, for the Global Consciousness Initiative and your plan to expand Heart of the Universe into a broader platform for spiritual education. It's truly visionary. I'm prepared to offer the initial seed funding we discussed, and perhaps more, once we finalize the details." He spoke just loud enough for the words to carry to the main table, a deliberate act, I suspected, to ensure my family heard every single, shocking syllable. The silence at their table was deafening now, broken only by the faint clinking of cutlery from other diners. My brother Mark, who had always ridiculed my spiritual ventures as financially unsound, looked as if he'd been punched in the gut, his face a mixture of envy and confusion. My aunts and uncles, who had always pitted my lack of a real job, exchanged bewildered glances. The irony was almost too sweet to bear. The very work they had dismissed was now attracting the attention of someone they revered, someone who held the keys to the kind of success they understood. Just then, as if on cue, the waiter arrived, a tall, impeccably dressed man with a practiced, neutral expression, and placed the bill, a thick leather folder, squarely in the middle of the main table. My father, still reeling from Mr. Thorne's revelation, instinctively reached for it, but the waiter, with a polite but firm gesture, gently slid the folder away from his grasp and, to everyone's astonishment, walked directly towards my table, towards me. He placed the bill right in front of me, his gaze direct and unwavering, a silent expectation in his eyes. The amount, emblazoned in bold, elegant script, screamed out, $3,200. A collective gasp rippled through my family's table, their eyes wide with disbelief and a sudden, dawning horror. My brother Mark, ever the quick calculator, probably already tallying up the cost of their extravagant seafood tower in vintage wine, looked like he might faint. The waiter looked at me, his expression still neutral, awaiting my reaction. I felt a surge of something akin to triumph, but it was quickly replaced by a quiet calm, a sense of knowing my own truth. I looked at the bill, then at the waiter, then, slowly, deliberately, at my family, who were now staring at me with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. Their previous amusement completely vanished. I just smiled, a small, knowing smile that didn't quite reach my eyes, and in a voice that was clear and steady, a voice that carried across the now hushed dining room, I said, "Not my table." The words hung in the air, a simple statement of fact, yet they carried the weight of years of unspoken hurt, of countless slights, of a lifetime of being dismissed. The waiter, momentarily surprised, blinked, then glanced at the main table, then back at me, a flicker of understanding dawning in his eyes. He seemed to grasp the unspoken drama unfolding before him. My family, however, was in utter disarray. Mark stammered, What? But we all ate together. My father, regaining some composure, chimed in, Stephanie, don't be ridiculous, of course it's our table. We invited you. I calmly picked up the bill, not to pay it, but to show them the details. Look closer, I said, my voice still calm, almost detached. This bill includes the private dining room, the premium vintage wine, and the special truffle tasting menu that was pre-ordered. I paused, letting the words sink in. I didn't order any of that. I was invited to join you, but clearly, I wasn't part of this table's arrangements. Mr. Thorne, who had been observing the scene with a subtle amusement, now spoke up, his voice resonating with authority. Indeed. Stephanie and I were just discussing her new venture, which requires a significant investment. It would be rather imprudent for her to be responsible for such an extravagant bill, especially one for a table she was explicitly told was for family only, wouldn't you agree? His gaze swept across my family, each word a hammer blow to their pride. My mother, finally finding her voice, stammered, But we assumed you'd want to contribute, Stephanie. You know, for the family. Her voice trailed off, a desperate plea in her eyes. It was then that the true, insidious twist revealed itself, a betrayal far deeper than mere exclusion. My brother Mark, his face pale, finally confessed, his voice barely a whisper, We were hoping you could help us out, Stephanie. Dad's business it's not doing well. And I made some bad investments. We thought if you came, you'd feel obligated to chip in, maybe even cover the whole thing. We heard about your online success, and we thought you had money now. My heart clenched, not with anger, but with a profound sadness. This wasn't just about a dinner bill, it was about their desperation, their manipulation, their willingness to use me, even after years of neglect and scorn. They hadn't invited me out of love or a desire for reconciliation, they had invited me to exploit me, to leverage my perceived newfound prosperity to bail them out of their own self-inflicted troubles. The laughter, the smirk, the trashcan table, it was all part of a calculated plan to humble me, to make me feel indebted, to ensure I wouldn't refuse their unspoken request for financial aid. The $3,200 bill wasn't just for their dinner, it was a test, a trap, a desperate gamble. I looked at Mark, his eyes now pleading, stripped of their usual arrogance, and then at my father, whose face was etched with worry lines I hadn't noticed before, and finally at my mother, who looked utterly defeated. The grand illusion of their perfect, successful lives had shattered, revealing the fragile, desperate reality beneath. Mr. Thorne, sensing the gravity of the moment, rose from his chair. Stephanie, perhaps we should continue our discussion elsewhere. It seems this family has some internal matters to resolve. He offered me his arm, a gesture of respect and support that felt like a warm embrace. I nodded, my gaze still fixed on my family, a complex swirl of emotions churning within me, hurt, yes, but also a strange sense of clarity, of liberation. I understand you're in a difficult situation, I said, my voice soft but firm, addressing them all. And while I wish you well, my journey, my purpose, is about healing and growth, not enabling patterns of manipulation or disrespect. My success, as you call it, comes from a place of authenticity and service, not from exploiting others. I paused, taking a deep breath. The bill for your table, I continued, looking directly at my father, is your responsibility. Just as your choices are your responsibility. I then turned to the waiter, who had been standing patiently, observing the entire exchange. Please, charge their table accordingly. With that, I took Mr. Thorne's arm, and together, we walked away from the main table, from the stunned silence of my family, from the lingering smell of the trash can, and out of the gilded spoon. As we stepped out into the cool night air, a sense of profound peace settled over me. The weight of their expectations, their judgments, their constant need for me to fit into their mold, had finally lifted. I had faced their scorn, seen through their deception, and stood in my truth, unyielding. The $3,200 bill was not my burden to bear, just as their definition of success was not my path to follow. My worth was not measured by their laughter or their approval, but by the quiet strength I found within, by the light I chose to share with the world through Heart of the Universe. And as Mr. Thorne and I continued our conversation about expanding my channel, about reaching more souls, about building a community based on genuine connection and spiritual awakening, I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was exactly where I was meant to be, walking my own path, guided by my own heart, no longer needing a seat at their table to know I belonged. The universe, in its infinite wisdom, had shown me that true family isn't always bound by blood, but by spirit, by respect, and by an unconditional love that transcends all earthly expectations.